What would you do if the person you trusted most shattered your world with a single lie? My marriage was supposed to be unbreakable until my wife announced she was pregnant with a child that couldn't be mine. What started as a painful betrayal unraveled into something far darker than I ever imagined. Lies, deception, crimes that would destroy more than just our marriage. This is the story of how I lost everything and still found a reason to keep going. My name is Daniel Carter, and until a few months ago, I thought I was living a pretty decent life. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 12 years. We met in college, one of those classic campus love stories. She was the lively, ambitious one, and I was the quiet, steady guy who worshipped the ground she walked on. Life wasn't perfect, but whose is? We both worked demanding jobs, Emily as a marketing executive and me as an IT specialist. We shared the usual ups and downs, but always seemed to find our way back to each other. Or so I thought. Our biggest hurdle came a few years ago when we found out Emily couldn't have children. After a series of tests, the doctor delivered the crushing news. Her body simply couldn't sustain a pregnancy. We cried together that night. Emily was inconsolable, devastated that she couldn't give me the family she thought I deserved. I told her it didn't matter, that she was my family. Life settled into a routine after that. We threw ourselves into our careers, traveled, and pretended we were okay. But looking back now, I realized that moment had set something dark in motion, something I couldn't see coming. The first cracks appeared subtly: missed calls, late nights at work, vague explanations. I chalked it up to stress. After all, her job was demanding, and I trusted her. I needed to trust her. But trust, as I would soon learn, is the easiest thing to destroy and the hardest thing to rebuild. It all started with the smallest of changes. Emily began acting different. She became more guarded with her phone, always keeping it face down on the table. She'd disappear into the other room for work calls and come back with a strained smile, her face flushed like she'd been running. I told myself I was imagining things. One evening, after a long day at work, she sat across from me at dinner, unusually quiet. Her fork traced lazy circles in her salad as if she were lost in thought. I asked if something was wrong, and she gave me a faint smile. "Just tired," she said. Then came the bombshell. 2 months later, she sat me down in our living room with a look I couldn't quite place. Nervous, almost excited. Her hands trembled as she took mine. "Daniel," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm pregnant." I remember feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. I blinked, trying to process the words. "Pregnant?" I repeated, my voice hollow. She nodded, her face lighting up with something that looked like relief. "I know. It's a miracle. After everything we went through, I didn't think it was possible." But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. A nagging thought clawed its way to the surface. We couldn't have kids. The doctor had been clear. Still, I tried to embrace the moment, convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, the impossible had happened. But deep down, a sickening doubt started growing. A week later, while Emily was out running errands, I couldn't shake the unease. Her excitement about the pregnancy felt off, too sudden, too desperate. Driven by a need I couldn't explain, I dug through our old medical files, searching for the fertility report. There it was, clear as day: patient unable to conceive naturally, permanent infertility. My hands shook as I reread the words. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. My mind spun, searching for any explanation that didn't involve the horrifying conclusion forming in my head. The child couldn't be mine. Still clinging to some shred of denial, I booked an appointment with a fertility specialist, hoping against hope that maybe something had changed, that a miracle had truly happened. 2 weeks later, the test results confirmed my worst fear. My fertility levels were still at 0. There was no way I could have fathered that child. The ground crumbled beneath me as the reality I'd been avoiding came crashing down. Emily was pregnant, but not by me. The night I confronted Emily will be etched in my mind forever. I'd spent the entire day replaying every memory, every late work meeting, every guarded glance. The walls of my reality felt like they were closing in. I wasn't sure if I was angrier at her or at myself for being so blind. She came home late again, her face glowing with the pregnancy she now wore like a badge of honor. As she slipped off her coat, I was already seated on the living room couch, holding the fertility report in trembling hands. "Hey, babe," she chirped, setting her purse down. "Sorry I'm late. Work was." "Sit down." My voice came out steadier than I expected. She hesitated, sensing something was off, then slowly lowered herself into the armchair across from me. Her smile faltered as she met my gaze. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. I held up the report. "Explain this." Her face drained of color. "What? What is that?" "Our fertility report," I said coldly. "The one that says you can't have kids." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't understand." "Stop lying." My voice cracked. "You're pregnant. But we both know I can't be the father." The room plunged into a suffocating silence. Her eyes flicked to the door like she was considering making a run for it, but she stayed put, her hands trembling in her lap. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Tell me what, Emily? That you've been having an affair? That the baby isn't mine?" Her shoulders sagged, as though the weight of the lies had finally crushed her. It just happened," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to." "Who is he?" I demanded, standing up so fast the coffee table shuddered. "Who's the father?" She stared at the floor, her silence louder than any confession. My chest heaved with a rage I could barely contain. "How long?" I barked. "How long has this been going on?" 6 months, she admitted in a broken whisper. "It was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake." I laughed bitterly. "A 6-month mistake that got you pregnant?" Her head snapped up, desperation flashing in her eyes. "It didn't mean anything. He doesn't matter. You're the one I love." I recoiled like she'd slapped me. "Love? You call this love?" She reached for me, but I backed away. Don't touch me." "Please, Daniel," she begged. "We can fix this. We can raise the baby together. No one ever has to know." Her words hit me like a slap. "No one ever has to know? Is that how you see me? Some fool you can manipulate?" I took a shaky breath, fighting the whirlwind of emotions tearing through me. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. "I can't even look at you right now," I said, my voice low and deadly calm. "Pack a bag and get out." Her eyes widened in shock. "Daniel, please. I don't have anywhere to go. That's not my problem anymore." I turned my back as she dissolved into sobs, her cries echoing through the house we had built together. The house that now felt like a graveyard of broken promises. After Emily left that night, the silence in the house became deafening. Every corner seemed haunted by memories of a life that no longer existed. Our wedding photos, the anniversary souvenirs from trips we took, even the old throw blanket she insisted on keeping despite its frayed edges. Everything screamed of us, a lie I could no longer believe. I couldn't sleep. Her words kept circling my mind like vultures. "We can raise the baby together. No one ever has to know." What kind of person says that? She wasn't just unfaithful. She was willing to bury the truth and make me raise another man's child like it was some twisted solution. The next few days were a blur. I took time off work, telling my boss I needed personal leave. I couldn't bear to see people, couldn't handle their casual conversations while my world was in ruins. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, tear-streaked and pleading, or worse, laughing with him, whoever he was. I drank more than I should have, sitting alone in the dark with a bottle of whiskey and the TV playing muted reruns. But no amount of alcohol could drown out the hollow ache inside me. The worst part was the hope, that small, insidious part of me that still missed her. Despite everything, I couldn't stop thinking about the good times. The lazy Sunday mornings in bed, our stupid inside jokes, the way she'd sneak up behind me while I was working and wrap her arms around my waist. How do you stop loving someone when every memory feels like a dagger? Anger was easier. I leaned into it like a lifeline. I hated her for what she did, for betraying me, lying, making me feel like a replacement in my own marriage. The rage kept me going when the sadness threatened to drown me. One night, unable to take the quiet anymore, I drove aimlessly through the city. The streets were slick with rain, glowing under the harsh yellow of streetlights. I ended up parked near the waterfront, staring out at the dark expanse of water. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel everything: the anger, the hurt, the crushing sense of loss. I thought about our plans, our future, the family we were supposed to have. The life I'd spent years building, now shattered because of her selfish choices. I punched the steering wheel until my knuckles bled, the pain grounding me in a way nothing else could. By the time I got home, I was drained, hollowed out. I realized something in that cold, empty car. Emily hadn't just broken my heart. She'd changed me. She'd taken the best parts of me: trust, love, hope, and left behind someone I barely recognized. I couldn't go back to the man I used to be. He was gone. The only thing left was figuring out what came next. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The emotional chaos hadn't disappeared, but it had hardened into something sharper. I was done being the broken, betrayed husband. It was time to act. Emily might have thought she could cry her way back into my life, but she didn't realize she crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative, to cast herself as the remorseful wife who'd made a mistake. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and she'd made it over and over again. The first thing I did was call an attorney. His name was James Tully, a no-nonsense divorce lawyer who came highly recommended by a friend. When I explained the situation, he didn't flinch, just asked coldly, "Do you want this quiet, or do you want her finished?" "Finished," I said without hesitation. He told me what I needed to do: gather evidence, secure finances, and lock down any joint accounts before Emily realized what was coming. The next few days were a whirlwind of signatures, phone calls, and consultations. I canceled her access to our shared credit cards and froze the joint savings account. I moved what was legally mine into a separate account, leaving her exactly zero. Through a private investigator James recommended, I learned more than I wanted to about Emily's affair. His name was Scott Reynolds, a coworker from her marketing firm. A married coworker. They'd been carrying on their sordid little romance for months. Business trips, hotel stays, even sneaking around in my car. The investigator even managed to get pictures, grainy but clear enough to destroy any illusions I had left. The sight of them together, smiling like love-struck teenagers, turned my stomach. But the real twist came when James called me back one afternoon with something even more shocking. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he warned. Scott Reynolds wasn't just her lover. He was her boss. And she wasn't just some low-level employee. Emily had been promoted during the affair. She'd leveraged their relationship for career advancement. I should have been disgusted, but all I felt was grim satisfaction. She was so focused on playing me that she never saw the train coming from the other direction. James had already drafted divorce papers, citing adultery and abandonment. In our state, infidelity could cost her everything. But I wasn't done yet. I called Scott's wife, Megan. She deserved to know the truth too. After a tense conversation where she fought disbelief, I emailed her the photos. The silence on the other end was deafening. I'm so sorry," she finally whispered. "Don't be," I replied. "You didn't do anything wrong, but they did." Later that evening, I sent Emily a simple text: "We need to talk. Come by tomorrow at 7 p.m. I didn't explain. I didn't plead. I wanted her off balance, unsure of what was waiting for her. The next night, she showed up on time, looking anxious but hopeful. She probably thought she could fix this, that if she cried enough or made grand promises, I'd take her back. But she didn't know what I'd set in motion. I opened the door, letting her in without a word. She started babbling immediately about how sorry she was, how she'd made a horrible mistake, how she wanted to come home. I just stood there, stone-faced, until she finally noticed the envelope on the coffee table. Her name was printed on the front in bold letters. "What's that?" she asked warily. "Your future," I said coldly. "Divorce papers." Her face crumpled. "Daniel, no. We can fix this. We can raise the baby together." "The baby isn't mine, remember?" I snapped, stepping closer. You made sure of that when you spread your legs for him. She flinched like I'd slapped her, tears spilling down her cheeks. I love you. He didn't mean anything. It was just, I was lonely and... Stop. My voice was ice. I know everything. I know about Scott. I know about your promotion. I even know about the business trips you took on my dime. You played me for a fool, but now the game's over. She stared at me, stunned and speechless. You're going to sign those papers, I continued. You'll walk away with nothing. No money, no house, no sympathy. And if you fight me, I'll make sure every dirty detail comes out in court. Her lip trembled. Daniel, please. I don't have anywhere else to go. That's not my problem. I stepped back, opening the door. Get out. She stood frozen for a moment, as if expecting me to soften, but there was nothing left to give. Finally, with a shattered expression, she walked out the door, leaving behind the wreckage of what we used to be. As I watched her disappear into the night, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just cold, quiet freedom. I expected Emily to vanish after that brutal confrontation. I thought she'd retreat to some dingy apartment, lick her wounds, and try to figure out her next move. But people like her, manipulative, entitled, don't go down without a fight. 2 days later, I got the first call. Daniel, she sobbed into the phone. I need to talk to you. Please. I'm pregnant, and I have nowhere to go. I hung up without saying a word. The next morning, she showed up at my office, causing a scene in the lobby. Security had to escort her out while she screamed about her rights and how she deserved another chance. Her calls turned into desperate text messages. Then came the voicemails, ranging from pitiful pleas to venom-laced threats. Each one was more frantic than the last, flipping between apologies and outright blame. You can't just throw me away like this. I made a mistake, but we were good together. I'm carrying a baby, for God's sake. Have some decency. You're a coward, Daniel. You never loved me. You just wanted to control me. I deleted them all. Then, one evening, the text stopped altogether. Silence. I should have felt relieved, but instead, an uneasy tension settled over me. The quiet felt wrong, like the air before a thunderstorm. The next blow came a week later when James, my attorney, called. His voice was tight with frustration. We've got a problem. Emily had filed a petition contesting the divorce, claiming I was emotionally abusive, controlling, and had forced her into the affair by being cold and neglectful. She was seeking half of everything, plus child support for a baby that wasn't mine. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone. You've got to be kidding me. James sighed. She's playing dirty, but I expected this. She's desperate. Desperate wasn't the word. She was dangerous. The next few weeks were hell. Legal motions flew back and forth while Emily spun her web of lies like a master manipulator. She filed for temporary spousal support and even tried to block me from selling the house. Her argument? We were still working on our marriage. The audacity of it made my blood boil. But James was relentless. He tore apart her claims one by one, presenting text messages, emails, and even surveillance footage from the investigator. By the time he was done, her petition looked like the desperate tantrum it was. Then came the real bombshell. One morning, James burst into my office, his eyes blazing with satisfaction. You're going to want to sit down for this. He slapped a thick file onto my desk, court records from another state. Turns out Scott Reynolds, her lover, had been under investigation for corporate fraud and embezzlement. He'd been fired 2 weeks earlier, right after I blew up Emily's life. But the kicker? Emily's name was all over the financial transactions. She'd been in on it, transferring company funds into dummy accounts while playing the loyal employee. Holy! I whispered, flipping through the damning evidence. James leaned back with a grim smile. She's looking at serious charges: wire fraud, conspiracy, aiding and abetting. You might not have to worry about her fighting for the house. She's going to need a lawyer for a different reason. I couldn't believe it. Just when I thought her deceit had hit rock bottom, she managed to dig deeper. A week later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Emily had been arrested. Scott was already in custody, and she'd been brought in as a co-conspirator. The charges were severe enough that she wouldn't be seeing daylight for a long time, if ever. The day after her arrest, I got an anonymous text message. "Hope you're happy. You ruined my life." I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it. Her life was already ruined the moment she decided to betray me. She just didn't realize it until now. Emily's arrest sent shockwaves through everyone who knew us. I got calls from mutual friends, distant relatives, and even some of her former coworkers, all fishing for details, pretending to be concerned. I ignored most of them. Let them gossip. They'd never understand the real story. Scott Reynolds, her lover and partner in crime, quickly turned on her. Facing decades in prison, he offered to testify against Emily in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'd been his accomplice, forging signatures, funneling money, and helping him cover his tracks while they played office lovers. Their scheme unraveled fast. James called me a few weeks later, sounding almost impressed. "She's going down, Daniel. The evidence against her is airtight." And just like that, the woman who once shared my life became a headline. Executive power couple busted for corporate fraud. Expectant mother facing prison time in financial scandal. The irony wasn't lost on me. Pregnant, disgraced, and abandoned by the man she wrecked her marriage for. Scott had already filed for divorce from his wife, leaving Emily utterly alone. I thought that was the end of it, until she called. One rainy afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Daniel, it's me." Her voice was small, broken, nothing like the defiant woman who once claimed she deserved better. I'm calling because I need your help." I laughed bitterly. "You've got to be kidding me. Please just listen. I'm pregnant, Daniel. I have no one." Her voice cracked, thick with desperation. "Scott's gone. My parents won't speak to me. I'm alone." For a moment, I felt a pang of something. Pity, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "You should have thought about that before you destroyed everything," I said coldly. Her breath hitched. I made mistakes, I know that. But the baby, he's innocent in all of this." The mention of the baby stung more than I expected. I thought of the family we once dreamed of, the life she stole from me with her lies and betrayal. "I'm facing years in prison," she continued, her voice trembling. If anything happens, I need someone to take care of him." The audacity of her request hit me like a slap. She was asking me, the man she'd lied to, cheated on, and betrayed, to raise her child. "I'm not your backup plan," I growled. "Find someone else." "Daniel, please." "No. You burned every bridge. This isn't my responsibility." Before she could say another word, I hung up, my hands shaking. For the first time in months, I felt something close to closure. She was finally paying the price for her selfishness, and there was nothing left for me to give. Emily's trial began in the dead of winter, the city wrapped in a bitter chill that mirrored the cold finality of what her life had become. I hadn't planned to attend. I thought watching her fall from grace would feel pointless, like reopening a wound that was finally starting to heal. But something drew me there, like I needed to witness the ending to truly move on. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, clinical and lifeless, with buzzing fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows. Emily sat at the defendant's table, flanked by her court-appointed attorney. Gone was the polished executive who used to command conference rooms. In her place was someone hollow-eyed and frail, visibly pregnant, her hands trembling in her lap. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered why we were here. Scott Reynolds had already taken a plea deal, throwing Emily under the bus in exchange for a reduced sentence. His smug, self-serving testimony painted her as the mastermind behind the fraud, claiming she pressured him into the scheme out of greed. It was a twisted version of the truth, but it worked. Emily's defense was weak, hinging on flimsy claims of coercion and emotional manipulation. Her lawyer tried to spin a sob story about how she'd been taken advantage of by a manipulative superior, classic victim narrative. But the jury wasn't buying it. The prosecution laid out a damning timeline, complete with bank statements, falsified contracts, and incriminating emails, her emails. Every lie she told, every dollar she stole, was laid bare for the world to see. The worst moment came when the prosecutor bluntly addressed the elephant in the room, her pregnancy. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice cold and precise, "do you expect this court to believe that your unborn child somehow absolves you of your crimes?" Emily's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't mean for this to happen. I made mistakes, but my baby, he's innocent. Please, don't take him away from me." Her sobs echoed through the courtroom, but the prosecutor didn't even blink. "The only person responsible for where you are now is you." I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just emptiness. She was finally seeing the consequences she'd spent so long outrunning. The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all charges: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit embezzlement, and falsifying company records. The judge didn't spare her. She was sentenced to 15 years, with no possibility of parole until she'd served at least 8. Her plea for leniency, due to her pregnancy, fell on deaf ears. The judge coldly stated that arrangements would be made for the child to be placed in foster care or with a designated guardian after birth. I left before they could take her away in handcuffs. I didn't need to see her dragged off in disgrace. It was over. Emily's conviction should have felt like the end, a final, decisive blow in the long, brutal war she started. But life doesn't tie itself up in neat little bows. The aftermath was messier than I ever imagined. 2 months after the trial, I got an unexpected call from social services. Emily had given birth to a baby boy while in custody. His name was Luke, and he was healthy despite everything. But there was a problem. Since Emily had listed me as her emergency contact in prison records, they needed to know if I was willing to assume custody, temporarily or permanently. The floor felt like it dropped out from beneath me. This was her child, his child, the living proof of everything she destroyed. "I'm not his father," I said numbly. "There's no way." "We understand, Mr. Carter," the social worker replied gently. "But the father hasn't come forward, and no other relatives have claimed him. If you decline, he'll enter the foster care system." Foster care. The words hit harder than I expected. I thought of that helpless baby, innocent, unaware of the mess he'd been born into. He didn't ask to be a part of this nightmare. He didn't choose any of it. I told the social worker I needed time to think. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and gut-wrenching memories. I couldn't shake the thought of Luke, alone, abandoned because of their sins. Was it fair to let him suffer for something he couldn't control? But raising her child? The idea twisted my insides. I couldn't imagine seeing Emily's eyes staring back at me every day, a living reminder of her betrayal. Then came another call, this time from Megan, Scott's ex-wife. She'd heard about Luke from a mutual acquaintance and was struggling with the same impossible decision. "I can't do it," she admitted tearfully. "I want to, but I can't. He's a part of them." I understood. God, did I understand? But as the days passed, something shifted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was something deeper. Some last, stubborn piece of humanity I hadn't managed to kill off in the wreckage of my old life. Luke didn't deserve to be cast aside like a piece of collateral damage. He deserved better. 2 weeks later, I made the call. "I'll take him." The social worker's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. You're doing something incredible." I didn't feel incredible. I felt terrified. What if I was making a mistake? What if I couldn't look at Luke without seeing his mother? Or worse, his father? But when I walked into that sterile, brightly lit facility and saw a tiny, blue-eyed baby wrapped in a blanket, everything changed. He didn't look like her, or Scott. He just looked small, fragile, and mine. The first time I held him, he blinked up at me with wide, curious eyes, his tiny hand curling around my finger. In that moment, I felt something break open inside me, something raw and painful, but also real. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't erase what Emily did. But maybe, just maybe, I could give Luke a chance at something better. Bringing Luke home was surreal. My house, once cold and lifeless, suddenly felt different. His presence filled the empty space Emily left behind, though in a way I never expected. The first few weeks were chaos. Late-night feedings, diaper disasters, and endless crying left me exhausted, but oddly grateful. I'd been living in a fog for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to care about something. Luke woke me up, literally and figuratively. Friends and family were shocked when they found out I'd taken him in. Some were supportive. Others, not so much. "You're raising her, kid?" my best friend Mike asked one night over a beer. After everything she did? I shrugged. "It's not his fault. He didn't choose this." Mike sighed, shaking his head. "You're a better man than me." I wasn't sure if that was true, but I had made a choice. Luke wasn't just some painful reminder of the past. He was a blank slate, a chance to rewrite the story. Still, adjusting wasn't easy. Every so often, I'd catch myself wondering if I'd made a colossal mistake, especially during the tough nights when Luke cried for hours and I felt helpless. But then he'd fall asleep in my arms, tiny fists resting against my chest, and the doubts would fade, if only for a while. A few months in, I received an unexpected letter from Emily, her first attempt to contact me since the trial. I stared at the envelope for hours, torn between curiosity and resentment. Finally, against my better judgment, I opened it. "Daniel, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know. I'm sorry. Not just for what I did to us, but for how I left things with Luke. I heard you took him in. You didn't have to, but you did. And I'll never be able to thank you enough for that. He's innocent in all of this. Please don't let my mistakes define his life. He deserves so much better than what I gave him. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But please, love him the way I should have. The way I couldn't. Emily." I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the letter trembling in my hands. Her words stirred something deep, old wounds I thought I'd buried. But I wasn't that broken, angry man anymore. Luke had changed that. I had changed that. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, not out of anger, but because I couldn't let her shadow hang over our lives. Whatever regret she felt was hers to bear. I'd made peace with my own. From that day forward, I focused on us, Luke and me. Not the past, not the betrayal, just the life we were building together, one day at a time. Life with Luke settled into something real. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was ours. The house, once filled with echoes of betrayal and anger, slowly became a home again. Luke's laughter chased away the shadows Emily left behind. I adjusted to single fatherhood faster than I expected. Sleepless nights became routine, and diaper changes felt like second nature after a while. My coworkers joked that I'd leveled up in multitasking, juggling conference calls with bottle feedings like a pro. Luke was growing fast. His first smile, his first tooth, his first wobbly steps. Every milestone felt like a small victory, a reminder that life could go on, even after everything. But the past wasn't done with me yet. One evening, after Luke was asleep, I got another letter from Emily, this time through her lawyer. It was a formal request for visitation rights. My chest tightened as I read the legal jargon, every line a fresh reminder of how deep her claws still reached. She was still trying to tether herself to my life, to Luke's life. James, my attorney, assured me we had options. Given her conviction and long prison sentence, the chances of her getting custody were slim, but visitation? That was trickier. Judges tend to be sympathetic when kids are involved, even when the parent is a convicted felon. "You don't have to decide now," James said, his voice calm but firm. "But if she pushes this, we'll fight." Days turned into weeks, and the letter sat untouched on my desk. I hated that she still had any power over me, hated that even after everything, she could still disrupt the fragile peace Luke and I had built. Then one night, as I was tucking Luke into bed, he reached out, grabbing my hand with his tiny fingers. His sleepy eyes sparkled with trust, unconditional and pure. He didn't know where he came from or what his mother had done. To him, I was his whole world, the only parent he'd ever known. And that's when I realized I couldn't run from Emily forever. Luke deserved to know the truth someday, but on my terms, my timeline, not hers. The next morning, I called James. "Draft a response," I said, my voice steady. "Supervised visitation, once a year." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "No," I exhaled sharply. "But Luke deserves something, even if she doesn't." The first supervised visit was scheduled at a neutral facility, heavily monitored by court-appointed staff. I was allowed to be present, but encouraged to keep a distance. I wasn't prepared for the wave of emotions when Emily walked in. She looked older, thinner. Her once polished appearance replaced by worn prison clothes and hollow eyes. But when she saw Luke, her face lit up with something real. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Luke stared at her curiously, unsure of who she was. He clung to my leg, his tiny fists gripping my jeans. "It's okay, buddy," I said softly, crouching down beside him. "You can say hi." He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes wide and cautious. Emily knelt, trembling, as though afraid to breathe. "Hi," Luke said shyly, offering a tiny wave. Her breath hitched and she whispered, "You're so big." The visit was awkward, stilted, and emotionally exhausting, but somehow necessary. For Luke, maybe even for me. As we left the facility that day, Luke grabbed my hand, swinging it happily as if nothing had changed. In his world, nothing had. Emily would always be a part of his story, but only the part one allowed her to play. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Life after Emily's first visit felt strangely normal. She faded back into the background like a bad memory I'd finally learned to live with. The court allowed her one supervised visit a year, but I made it clear that was all she'd get. No phone calls, no letters. She accepted the terms without a fight, almost as if she knew she was lucky to get even that much. Meanwhile, Luke was thriving. He grew into a curious, energetic toddler who filled the house with laughter and endless questions about the world. His favorite word was why. "Why is the sky blue, Dad? Why do dogs bark? Why don't I have a mommy like Noah at daycare?" That last one hit me like a gut punch. I knew the question would come eventually. I just didn't expect it then, on an ordinary Tuesday while making macaroni and cheese. I froze, my heart pounding. How do you explain something so big to someone so small? I knelt down, meeting his wide, innocent eyes. "Everyone's family is different, buddy," I said carefully. "Some kids have a mom and a dad. Some just have a dad, like you have me." He tilted his head thoughtfully, processing my answer in that serious way only kids can. "Okay," he said finally, before breaking into a grin. "Can I have more mac and cheese now?" I laughed, relief washing over me. His world was still simple for now. As the years went by, I braced myself for more questions. Luke started school, made friends, and grew into a clever, adventurous boy who could light up a room with his smile. I kept Emily at arm's length, sticking to the court-mandated visits. Each time, she seemed more broken, more resigned to the life she'd created for herself. I couldn't bring myself to feel anything for her anymore. Not anger, not pity. She was just someone I used to know. Luke's 8th birthday changed everything. We threw a small party in the backyard with a space-themed cake, a bouncy house, and all his friends from school. He was beaming, running around in his astronaut costume like the fearless explorer he believed himself to be. After the party, as we cleaned up, Luke found me sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the fading sunset. He climbed into my lap, resting his head on my shoulder like he used to when he was little. "Dad," he asked softly, "can I ask you something important?" My chest tightened. "Of course, buddy. You can ask me anything." He hesitated, fiddling with the zipper of his jacket. "Is my mom still alive?" The air seemed to still around us. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Yes, she's alive." He nodded slowly, as if he'd been preparing for that answer. "Why doesn't she live with us?" I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close. "It's complicated. She made some bad choices a long time ago, and because of that, she can't be here." Luke was quiet for a long time, processing my words with a maturity far beyond his years. "Does she love me?" I felt my throat close, emotion swelling in my chest. I thought of Emily's tear-streaked face during those awkward, supervised visits, the way she looked at him, even when she knew she couldn't be part of his life. "Yes," I whispered. "She loves you very much." Luke nodded again, resting his head back on my shoulder. "I love you more," he murmured sleepily. Tears stung my eyes, but I managed a shaky smile. I love you too, kiddo. More than anything. In that moment, I realized something important. The past didn't have to define either of us. Emily's choices were hers, but Luke's future was still ours to shape. Years passed, and life moved forward like it always does. Luke grew into a smart, compassionate teenager with a sharp wit and a heart far bigger than I ever expected. He excelled in school, played soccer, and spent hours tinkering with gadgets he built from scratch. I never hid the truth from him, but I didn't let it consume our lives either. Emily remained a distant shadow, present only in yearly supervised visits that became less emotional and more transactional as Luke grew older. By the time he turned 16, those visits stopped altogether. Emily, worn down by time and regret, stopped showing up. We received a final letter from her through the prison system, short and simple. I'm sorry for everything. Take care of him. Tell him. I tried. That was the last we ever heard from her. Years later, on the eve of Luke's college graduation, we sat together on the back porch, watching the stars like we used to when he was a kid. He was about to leave for an engineering internship across the country. A new adventure in a life I never could have imagined back when everything fell apart. Dad, he said quietly, breaking the silence. I've been thinking about her. I nodded, not needing him to explain. I used to be so angry at her for not being there, he admitted. But I think I get it now. Some people just can't fix what they've broken. His words hit me harder than he probably realized. I reached over, squeezing his shoulder. You've turned out pretty damn amazing, despite everything. He smiled faintly. Because of you, Dad. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sky stretch endlessly above us. The past felt distant, like an old wound that no longer hurt. I thought about Emily, not with anger or regret, but with something closer to acceptance. We'd both lost so much, but Luke, he was the one thing that came out of the wreckage, the one thing worth saving. Do you think she ever found peace? Luke asked quietly. I stared at the stars, their cold, distant light blinking through the dark. I hope so, I said honestly. But whether she did or not, we did. Luke nodded, understanding in that quiet, unspoken way we'd developed over the years. As the night deepened, I realized I wasn't just watching the stars. I was watching the future, his future. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid.